In 2026, there is no longer just one strategy that works for all types of investments in all markets across the country. With 6 of Australia's capital cities with an average house price of over $1 million now, rates going up for the first time in a couple of years, and household expenses being higher than ever before, it's now super important to not just get longer term capital growth on your properties, but phenomenal yields that can protect you and your family in an uncertain economic environment. In today's video, we're going to talk about this high yield strategy. We're going to talk about why the underlying demand for these types of properties has never been stronger in Australia's history. And we're also going to show you 3 real world examples with suburbs and exact houses where you can go and execute this strategy right now.
Now, the Granny Flat Bros are back talking about one of our favorite strategies that we've helped hundreds of investors be able to execute. And I feel as though in this environment in 2026, with high property prices, high construction costs, high cost of living, it's so important to be able to manufacture some value. So let's get stuck into talking about how we can create a better yield using the house and granny flat strategy.
Now, where this idea originated for me personally was I wanted everything out of every single property that I bought. So I started investing at 24. I bought 20 properties since that time. And I got to a point where I wanted capital growth, cash flow, tax benefits, as well as timing the market perfectly. Now, what this house and granny flat strategy has allowed me to do is go from rates at 2% to 7 or 8% without breaking a sweat. It's enabled me during good markets and bad markets to sort of ride the wave without stressing about cash flow on a weekly basis. And most importantly, when one of my tenants leaves one of these properties, I've still got 50% of my rent coming in, which covers the downside or the risk associated with investing.
Now, we're not talking about the old granny flat that maybe your mate used to live in back in the day in the back of their parents' property. Like, we're talking about creating a really functional design, making a really functional site plan so that we can create ultimate privacy and separation for the main dwelling and the granny flat so that both of them do remain rented out for an extended period of time and attract good quality tenants. Now, in 2026, you can build a beautiful 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom, nice little outdoor entertaining area, roughly about a 60 square meter granny flat for around $230,000. Now, depending on where you're building this will determine how much rent you're going to be able to achieve. Some of our clients in Brisbane are able to rent these out for more than $600 per week at the moment, which is insane. When we first started building them in Brisbane, they were renting for about $250 to $300 per week. So it has gone up so much since the good old days. So even though construction costs are a little bit higher in 2026 compared to 2016, naturally you're getting a much higher rental yield on the back of it as well.
Now, I've personally built actually 5 of these myself and well over 100 for our clients over the last 13 years. And what I've learned from them is they don't stay vacant for long. In fact, I've actually never had a single week of vacancy on any one of my granny flats over the last 13 years personally. On top of this, they add a level of customization that is extremely cool. So I've done ones with blue kitchens, with black kitchens, with really nice flooring. And what I'm ultimately doing is not creating that traditional granny flat that we saw out the back of Sydney where you're sharing the same clothesline and awkwardly looking at the other person through your window, but it's a custom 2-bedroom, smaller home, but doesn't just get great cash flow, but gives you some phenomenal tax benefits once you get that tax depreciation report set up as well.
One of my favorite aspects about the granny flat strategy as well is you don't have to fork out 100% of the construction costs out of your own back pocket as well, because there are some banks out there that will provide you with a construction loan if you've got a 20% deposit and if you've got really good building plans and you've got maybe a rental appraisal and a really good case study to suggest to those banks that this is going to be a great option for them and also for you as an investor.
Now, the first example I wanted to talk about today was actually for one of our clients, Chris, and we bought this property in a suburb called Wyndham Vale, which is 32 kilometres from the CBD of Melbourne. Now, over the last 8 years, Chris actually did 4 of these up here in Brisbane with us, but now that those 4 properties he bought have doubled in value in the last 5 or 6 years, he decided to reorientate his strategy towards Melbourne to something more affordable. Now, this beautiful 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 2-car garage home sold for just $745,000 and would rent any day of the week right now for at least $550 a week. Now, because the rental returns in Melbourne at the moment haven't gone up by that $200 to $300 per week that we've seen in the Sunny Coast, Gold Coast, Adelaide, Perth, or Brisbane in the last 5 years, he decided to go out there and immediately build a $230,000 two-bedroom granny flat. Now, Chris's granny flat has just been finished and it looks like we're going to get almost $450 per week in rent. So the total cost of this incredible 900 square meter block with a great 4-bedroom home that was fully renovated plus a brand new granny flat was just $975,000. Now, if we were looking to do the exact same thing in Sydney right now, you'd be looking at almost $2 million to complete this project. Or in Brisbane, you'd be looking at $1.2 to $1.3 million to do the same thing. And then on top of this, the total rent is going to be just about $1,000 per week today. But if we see the same pressure on the rental market in Melbourne that we've seen in every other capital city in Australia over the next 5 years, then we hope that this rent goes to sort of $1,400, $1,500 per week over that time.
Now, it wasn't very long ago that you actually weren't able to do a granny flat down in Victoria. It was a statewide ban on these dual living house and granny flat properties. But in November of 2024, they actually started to allow private investors to bring new supply to the market by doing these house and granny flats. Now, they've got some very specific rules and regulations, so you absolutely want to talk to a great builder or town planner down there to make sure that you're doing it the right way, where you're going to legally be able to rent them out completely separately. But this was one of the reasons why we really loved Melbourne as a great option for investors moving forward, because it's really the only market in Australia that hasn't cranked over the last 5 or 7 years. So properties are super undervalued, but rental yields are really low down there because it hasn't seen the same boom as other markets. But now we can create that extra yield, we can create that extra cash flow through this house and granny flat strategy, because it's not just the rental income that you're getting. Once you build that brand new granny flat, you can go to a BMT or somebody else and get your tax depreciation schedule report, hand that over to your accountant, and you're going to be able to generate some really good tax benefits off that granny flat as well. So it's not just increasing the rental return, there's also some awesome tax benefits that we love.
Now, this strategy doesn't just work down there in Victoria, and I'd say with Victoria, there's two things to be really, really aware of. There's something called a single dwelling covenant on many properties in Victoria, which means you can only have that one standalone house on the block. So definitely get your solicitor to double check that one. The other one is they built so many beautiful, bloody big, single-story brick and tile homes that 95% of the sites don't actually fit a granny flat in a really, really nice way in the backyard. So they're your two big asterisks down there. This strategy, there's a statewide position in New South Wales, so it really doesn't matter which council you're in. I think down there you can build 60 square metre granny flats as long as the site's a certain size with a certain frontage. So an example of that is I like the 600 square metre sites with a nice big 15 metre frontage and about 50% site coverage between the front home and the granny flat. So every part of Australia has different nuances around this. Up here in Queensland, where we've done over 100 of these for clients over the last 10 years, there's 7 different council areas. Unfortunately, the 7 different councils here in Southeast Queensland all have different positions and different views on granny flats in terms of the size, the structure, the site coverage, the land size. So you've really got to work with, as Simon said, a town planner and a builder as part of your due diligence before you go rushing out there and buying something.
Now, we do get a lot of pushback on this strategy because people are uncertain or unsure who's actually going to be renting the property. But we've noticed that demand for granny flats has increased massively since we started thinking or talking about this strategy. And one of my favorite analysts, Michael Matusik, has done some incredible articles recently on Australian demographics and how we're living, which is once again proving that demand for these granny flats is massively increasing, with kids living with their parents for a lot longer, single people wanting their own space, and then the older baby boomer generations that are maybe moving back in with their kids to have that extra support.
You know, I've got one of these houses and granny flats up here on the Sunshine Coast at Mooloolaba, and for the last 5 years, for half that time, there have been a couple of baby boomers that pay the rent on it that don't even live there 9 months a year because they wanted an affordable place to stay while they were traveling the world or caravanning, which for me as an owner has been phenomenal because there's been less wear and tear on my property over that time. So when it comes to houses and granny flats and more advanced property strategies like this one where you're targeting growth and cash flow and tax benefits, it's obviously not for everyone. But who does this idea work for?
You know, you're absolutely right. It definitely doesn't work for everyone, but it does work for a large cohort of residential property investors. One of my closest mates, he still lives in Sydney and he's living in Bondi or Bronte and, you know, working a full-time job, earning incredible money, but just can't get into the Sydney property market, not even to an apartment in Bondi Beach. So he's looking at this rent investment strategy and buying investment properties in locations where he can afford the properties and, you know, waiting until he can get himself into a position to buy a property. So we sat down at the end of last year to develop a strategy and I educated him on the Geelong property market, which looks really undervalued at the moment. And he was able to go out and buy a beautiful, freshly renovated 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in a lovely suburb with like lots of owner occupiers, really close to the beach, really close to the city in Geelong, not too far from the Melbourne CBD either. But the cool thing is it's on a massive block. Like he bought a 650 square meter block of land, but conveniently the house is located to the front left-hand boundary. So you've got this huge amount of side access and a massive flat backyard that's ripe for redevelopment. Now, he's got so many options on this property. He can redevelop the shed that's already existing in the backyard and turn that into a granny flat. He could bulldoze that and start from scratch and build a pristine, brand new 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom granny flat for about $230,000 on that side as well. Now, he picked up the property for $775,000 and it's expected to rent for between $550 to $580 per week as it is right now. But talking to real estate agents in the area, if he was to spend $230,000 building a granny flat in the backyard and repurposing that space, he'd be able to get $420 to $450 per week for that granny flat as well as the depreciation on top of it. So he's got himself into a position where, as the property stands right now, it's a great investment. But he's got this ace up his sleeve where when he's ready, if he's got the cash or if he's got the equity, he can repurpose that backyard, generate a massive rental yield and just set and forget the property for the future, which will help him obviously on his journey to financial freedom to generate a passive income. But he'll also be able to sell that property in the future for a massive profit in order to help him get into his own home down in Sydney. So I think it really works for a lot of different types of investors. You just got to have that willingness to put a little bit of work into the property.
Now, another example that we really like at the moment is this area in the northwest of Melbourne. Now, we just picked up this little cracker for just $620,000. Now, it's cool that Luke's living in Bondi and earning a fortune as a single guy, but a lot of our clients are families or further down the line where they either don't have as much to spend or they don't want to put themselves in a position with interest rates going up a little bit at the moment and expenses being so high in their lives that they're feeling over leveraged or a little bit uncomfortable with how much debt they're moving into. Now, what I love about this property is Shannon was able to buy this property with a beautiful renovated house on it, as well as a great piece of land for less than the land would cost in Sydney or Brisbane right now to buy the exact same site this far from the CBD, which means he effectively got this house for free. But because he's one of our clients, he wants a little bit more out of this property. And so he will get the long-term growth, and he did time this absolutely beautifully, but he wants the cash flow, the risk diversification, as well as the tax benefits on this one too. So this 620K property should rent for at least $450 per week. And then he's gonna build a $230,000 granny flat, which in today's market, like Brisbane 5 or 6 years ago, will rent for about $350. But if it's anything like Adelaide, Perth or Brisbane, but we hope these rent returns will increase like they have everywhere else in the country since COVID, with the 160,000 people that are moving into Melbourne right now each year, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics.
Now, we just want to reiterate that this strategy isn't for everyone, and we're not saying that you have to go out there and buy a property with granny flat potential, because what you'll notice about all of these properties is they are a little bit older, and that may result in some slightly higher maintenance costs throughout the period of holding that property. And to be completely honest, these properties were not the first investments that these clients started with. In fact, they were quite experienced investors looking at their second or third investment properties, maybe even more than that when coming into it. But as you get more experience as a property investor, you're looking for different ways to increase your return on investment, whether that's from a growth perspective or a cash flow or a tax minimization perspective. And so this can be a really great option.
Now, whether you're looking at investing in a really high quality single income, normal house, or doing something a little bit more advanced, like a house with granny flat potential in the next 12 months, Simon and I would love to offer you a one-on-one strategy session. To book that session, simply jump over to www.pumpedonproperty.com, click that free strategy session button. We can talk about where you are right now. We can talk about where you'd like to be longer term. We can talk about the 20 largest markets in the country and the pros and cons of each. And then you can take that information and go and absolutely smash it on your own, or potentially you can become one of the extremely small number of clients that we take on each week. But either way, we wish you all the best on your journey to financial freedom.
It was all a dream.